Chapter 5. The next few days passed idly. Weeks passed too, I think. Hidden away in this cosmopolitan hotel, we lived apart, unnoticed. There was the feeling that time went what pace it pleased, now fast, now slow, now standing still. The similarity of the brilliant days, set between wondrous dawns and sunsets, left the impression that it was really one long, endless day without divisions. The mind's machinery of measurement suffered dislocation. Time went backwards, dates were forgotten, the month, the time of year, the century itself went down into undifferentiated life. The present certainly slipped away curiously. Newspapers and politics became unimportant, news uninteresting, English life so remote as to be unreal, European affairs shadowy. The stream of life ran in another direction altogether, backwards. The names and faces of friends appeared through mist. People arrived as though dropped from the skies. They suddenly were there. One saw them in the dining room, as though they had just slipped in from an outer world that once was real, somewhere. Of course, the steamer sailed 4 times a week, and the journey took 5 days, but these things were merely known, not realized. The fact that here it was summer, whereas over there winter reigned, helped to make the distance not quite thinkable. We looked at the desert and made plans. We will do this. We will do that. We must go there. We'll visit such and such a place. Yet nothing happened. It always was tomorrow or yesterday, and we shared the discovery of Alice that there was no real today. For our thinking made everything happen. That was enough. It had happened. It was the reality of dreams. Egypt was a dream world that made the heart live backwards. It came about thus that for the next few weeks I watched a fading life, myself alert and sympathetic, yet unable somehow to intrude and help. Noticing various little things by which George Isley betrayed the progress of the unequal struggle, I found my assistance negatived by the fact that I was in similar case myself. What he experienced in large, and finally, I too experienced, in little and for the moment. For I seemed also caught upon the fringe of the invisible web. My feelings were entangled sufficiently for me to understand. And the decline of his being was terrible to watch. His character went with it. I saw his talents fade, his personality dwindle, his very soul dissolve before the insidious and invading influence. He hardly struggled. I thought of those abominable insects that paralyze the motor systems of their victims and then devour them at their leisure, alive. The incredible adventure was literally true, but being spiritual may not be told in the terms of a detective story. This version must remain an individual rendering, an aspect of one possible version. All who know the real Egypt, that Egypt which has nothing to do with dams and nationalists and all the external welfare of the falaheen, will understand. The pilfering of her ancient dead she suffers still. She, in revenge, preys at her leisure on the living. The occasions when he betrayed himself were ordinary enough. It was the glimpse they afforded of what was in progress beneath his calm exterior that made them interesting. Once, I remember, we had a lunch together at Mena, and after visiting certain excavations beyond the Giza pyramids, we made our way homewards by way of the Sphinx. It was dusk, and the main army of tourists had retired, though some few dozen sightseers still moved about to the cries of donkey boys and baksheesh. The vast head and shoulders suddenly emerged, riding undrowned above the sea of sand. Dark and monstrous in the fading light, it loomed, as ever, a being of non-human lineage. No amount of familiarity could depreciate its grandeur, its impressive setting, the lost expression of the countenance that is too huge to focus as a face. 1,000 visits leave its power undiminished. It has intruded upon our earth from some uncommon world. George Isley and myself both turned aside to acknowledge the presence of this alien, uncomfortable thing. We did not linger, but we slackened pace. It was the obvious, inevitable thing to do. He pointed then, with a suddenness that made me start. He indicated the tourists standing around. "See," he said in a lowered tone, "day and night you'll always find a crowd obedient to that thing. But notice their behavior. People don't do that before any other ruin in the world I've ever seen." He referred to the attempts of individuals to creep away alone and to stare into the stupendous visage by themselves. At different points in the deep sandy basin were men and women, standing solitary, lying, crouching, apart from the main company, where the dragoman mouthed their exposition with impertinent glibness. "The desire to be alone," he went on, half to himself, as we paused a moment, "the sense of worship which insists on privacy." It was significant, for no amount of advertising could dwarf the impressiveness of the inscrutable visage into whose eyes of stone the silent humans gazed. Not even the redcoat, standing inside one gigantic ear, could introduce the commonplace. But my companion's words let another thing into the spectacle, a less exalted thing, dropping a hint of horror about that sandy cup. It became easy, for a moment, to imagine these tourists worshipping against their will, to picture the monster noticing that they were there, that it might slowly turn its awful head, that the sand might visibly trickle from a stirring paw, that, in a word, they might be taken, changed. "Come," he whispered in a dropping tone, interrupting my fancies as though he half divined them. "It is getting late, and to be alone with the thing is intolerable to me just now. But you notice, don't you," he added as he took my arm to hurry me away, "how little the tourists matter. Instead of injuring the effect, they increase it. It uses them." And again, a slight sensation of chill, communicated possibly by his nervous touch, or possibly by his earnest way of saying these curious words, passed through me. Some part of me remained behind that hollow trough of sand, prostrate before an immensity that symbolized the past. A curious wild yearning caught me momentarily, an intense desire to understand exactly why that terror stood there, its actual meaning long ago to the hearts that set it waiting for the sun, what definite role it played, what souls it stirred, and why, in that system of towering belief and faith whose indestructible emblem it still remained. The past stood grouped so solemnly about its menacing presentiment. I was distinctly aware of this spiritual suction backwards that my companion yielded to so gladly, yet against his normal modern self, for it made the past appear magnificently desirable, and loosened all the rivets of the present. It bodied forth 3 main ingredients of this deep Egyptian spell: size, mystery, and immobility. Yet, to my relief, the cheaper aspect of this Egyptian glamour left him cold. He remained unmoved by the commonplace mysterious. He told no mummy stories, nor ever hinted at the supernatural quality that leaps to the mind of the majority. There was no play in him. The influence was grave and vital, and although I knew he held strong views with regard to the impiety of disturbing the dead, he never, in my hearing, attached any possible revengeful character to the energy of an outraged past. The current tales of this description he ignored. They were for superstitious minds or children. The deities that claimed his soul were of a grander order altogether. He lived, if it may be so expressed, already in a world his heart had reconstructed or remembered. It drew him in another direction altogether. With the modern, sensational view of life, his spirit held no traffic any longer. He was living backwards. I saw his figure receding mournfully, yet never sentimentally, into the spacious, golden atmosphere of recaptured days. The enormous soul of buried Egypt drew him down. The dwindling of his physical appearance was, of course, a mental interpretation of my own, but another, stranger interpretation of a spiritual kind moved parallel with it, marvelous and horrible. For as he diminished outwardly and in his modern present aspect, he grew within gigantic. The size of Egypt entered into him. Huge proportions now began to accompany any presentiment of his personality to my inner vision. He towered. These two qualities of the land already obsessed him, magnitude and immobility. And that awe which modern life ignores contemptuously woke in my heart. I almost feared his presence at certain times, for one aspect of the Egyptian spell is explained by sheer size and bulk. Disdainful of mere speed today, the heart is still uncomfortable with magnitude, and in Egypt there is size that may easily appall, for every detail shunts it laboriously upon the mind. It elbows out the present. The desert's vastness is not made comprehensible by mileage, and the sources of the Nile are so distant that they exist less on the map than in the imagination. The effort to realize suffers paralysis. They might equally be in the moon or Saturn. The undecorated magnificence of the desert remains unknown, just as the proportions of pyramid and temple, of pylons and colossi, approach the edge of the mind, yet never enter in. All stand outside, clothed in this prodigious measurement of the past, and the old beliefs not only share this titanic effect upon the consciousness, but carry it stages further. The entire scale haunts with uncomfortable immensity, so that the majority run back with relief to the measurable details of a more manageable scale. Express trains, flying machines, Atlantic liners, these produce no unpleasant stretching of the faculties compared to the influence of the Karnak pylons, the pyramids, or the interior of the Serapeum. Close behind this magnitude, moreover, steps the monstrous. It is revealed, not in sand and stone alone, in queer effects of light and shadow, of glittering sunsets and of magical dusks, but in the very aspect of the bird and animal life. The heavy-headed buffaloes betray it equally with the vultures, the myriad kites, the grotesqueness of the mouthing camels. The rude, enormous scenery has it everywhere. There is nothing lyrical in this land of passionate mirages. Uncouth immensity notes the little human flittings. The days roll by in a tide of golden splendor. One goes helplessly with the flood, but it is an irresistible flood that sweeps backwards and below. The silent-footed natives in their colored robes move before a curtain, and behind that curtain dwells the soul of ancient Egypt. The reality, as George Isley called it, watching with sleepless eyes of gray infinity. Then, sometimes the curtain stirs and lifts an edge. An invisible hand creeps forth. The soul is touched, and someone disappears.